Imagine you are sitting around a flickering campfire on a freezing winter night 12,000 years ago in a fertile valley. Right next to you is a woman named Lena. She is carefully holding in her calloused hands a few wild wheat seeds, sparsely gathered after the last harvest. This year, the harvest is not enough, and a sudden blizzard strikes, burying the entire valley in pure white. In that moment of despair, could you or Lena imagine that? Those tiny and fragile seeds in her hands would completely change the fate of all humanity. But there is a shocking truth. We often think that settling down and farming made human life more leisurely and joyful. However, archaeological evidence reveals the exact opposite. The skeletons of the first farmers show that they were shorter, more stunted, and suffered from significantly more diseases than their nomadic ancestors. They had to bend over and work exhaustingly under the harsh heat of the sun. It sounds truly paradoxical. Why did switching to agriculture make humans much weaker and more tired than hunting and gathering? It is quite a surprising paradox. So if that is the case, why did our ancestors abandon their free-roaming life to decide to stop, build villages, and start farming? To understand this monumental turning point, we must go back to a very distant past. Before uncovering this secret, if you love mysterious scientific stories, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Our journey to explore human history is still long, and many fascinating things are waiting ahead. Back then, about 12,000 years ago, when the last ice age ended, prehistoric humans lived roaming in small groups in valleys and dense forests. We survived by moving constantly to hunt animals and gather fruits, having nothing in our hands but simple spears and bows. The earth began to gradually warm up, but suddenly, a prolonged, record-breaking cold spell struck, depleting crops and forcing wild animals to change their migration routes. Facing an unprecedented famine in history, our ancestors were forced to ask a vital question: how to store food to survive the harsh winter. The answer did not come overnight. After the ice melted and the climate gradually stabilized, around 10,000 years before Christ, the riverine steppes in Mesopotamia began to become fertile, overflowing with wild wheat and wild barley. Instead of just gathering, humans started collecting seeds and scattering them on wet mudflats. They learned how to pound grains on stone slabs and store food in clay jars or deep pits to save for the dry season. Precisely because they had to watch over these precious food stores, humans could no longer continue to move constantly. They began building earthen houses, erecting fences, and settling around the fields. The stable food source caused a population boom, forcing them to invent new tools like sickles and bone hoes to expand arable land. From the Middle East to the Nile Valley, from the ancient wet rice-growing regions in China to the cornfields in America, humanity began to share the same agricultural song. From a wandering species, we tied our own lives to the lands. The evidence for this monumental transition lies deep underground. Archaeologists have found the ancient village of Jericho, built with solid defensive walls from 9,600 years before Christ, proving humans had firmly taken root in one place. Genetic analysis of crops like wheat and corn indicates that the genetic mutations that helped increase yield appeared exactly in the early stage of the Neolithic period. Even more amazingly, the ice cores, drilled from the Arctic, have clearly recorded a sudden temperature drop 12,800 years ago. That climate shock was a cruel push of nature, forcing humans to find a way to stabilize their food source. But this is the strangest part. We often imagine our ancestors eagerly holding hands to switch to being farmers. But in reality, history has recorded many painful experimental steps. The first settled communities sometimes had to face disastrous crop failures due to harsh weather, and they bitterly abandoned the village to return to the deep forest to hunt and gather. Like a survival game, they constantly experimented, adjusted, and only truly committed to the fields when there was no way back behind them. Looking through a broader lens, the agricultural revolution is the seed that sowed the entire human civilization. Knowing how to farm brought free time and surplus food, leading to the birth of potters, weavers, and then forming vast city-states, writing, and science. However, it also brought a completely new concept, which is ownership. When someone owns fields and granaries, power emerges, followed by class division and bloody wars to fight over land. Agriculture created communities, and that is also the foundation for forming ancient religions, where humans gathered at giant stone temples to give thanks and express their awe of nature. Ultimately, we abandoned the nomadic lifestyle because rice and grains became something undeniable. It fed women and children, boomed the population, and built complex social structures. The success of agriculture turned into an invisible trap. Once humanity had become tied by blood and flesh to the fields and granaries, the road back to the wild forests was forever closed. Let us return to the freezing winter night with the woman named Lena at the beginning of the story. After the terrifying blizzard, she knew that the few wheat seeds buried deep under that snow would sprout. And many generations later, those heavy heads of grain would feed the first villages of humanity. The story has closed into a perfect circle, turning a small, nomadic family into a strong, settled community. This story reminds us of something incredibly profound. The thing we always consider an inevitable progressive choice turns out to be a complex chain of destiny, interwoven by climate change, survival instinct, and culture. Human fate has never been bound to a fixed mold. Sometimes, just a change in weather and a few tiny seeds are enough to steer all of humanity down a completely different path. So have you ever wondered, with the constant fluctuations of the present world, where will the next steps take our human species?